So my presentation is really looking at how does science support nature-based tourism. It's more about how policy can do that, but using great white sharks and great white shark tours as an example. So don't ask me any questions that are too tricky about great white sharks, because I'll have a go, but I probably won't know the answer. Okay, so just firstly, very quickly, definitions of ecologically sustainable development and ecotourism. So just to start this off, ecotourism actually incorporates ecologically sustainable development as part of its definition. So let's, when we think about ecotourism, think about it as being part and parcel of ecologically sustainable development, because often tourism is perceived to be an impact on the environment. Ecotourism isn't, because by definition ecotourism incorporates ecologically sustainable development. Bad tourism certainly does have an impact on the environment. What I'm going to try and talk about today is just one method that we may be able to use to ensure that tourism is ecologically sustainable. So firstly, just I'm going to be talking about the Neptune Islands, which is in the Neptune Islands, Ronan Valley Taylor Marine Park, over in the entrance to Spencer Gulf. It's basically a network of two clusters of islands, North Neptune and South Neptune. It's only one of 5 sites in the world where cage diving with great whites occurs, and it's one of only 2 where they are around the whole season. So that's South Africa and South Australia. So just a couple of things about the tourism operation. Firstly, it generates about $11 million for the state economy every year and supports over 70 jobs. So it's quite significant. So there's a lot of pressure to ensure that it is ecologically sustainable, because if it's not ecologically sustainable, it can't be economically sustainable either. Most people will be familiar, but it's operated under licence from the Department for Environment and Water. It's based around cages that are lowered off boats and people using either scuba equipment or hooker equipment to view the sharks. There's 3 operators that are licensed. 2 of those are licensed to use burley, or what we call fish-based attractants. And when we think about how sharks are attracted, I think it's worth thinking about there's a variety of stimuli that attract sharks into cages and around boats. Obviously, it's an important aggregation area, but then the use of burley is important to get them close enough for people to see them. Okay, this is what I'm focusing on, is the South Australian White Shark Tour licensing policy. This is a policy that's been developed over the last probably 8 years, and it's been finalised in this form just last year. It covers a whole range of things, ranging through from industry accreditation through to limits and controls, licensing, and number 9 there, which I'm focusing on, which is around adaptive management. Okay, one of the real drivers for the development of this policy was the expansion of the industry, and this is a chart that shows how the frequency of tours has increased since the early 2000s through to 2010. So once day trips started in the early 2000s, it took off. Lots of people wanted to do it, and we had more and more tours happening. That had a couple of outcomes. One is that people started to get quite concerned about environmental impacts, and the other is that it became much more competitive. People wanted to get into this industry. So that's what initiated our review of the industry and ultimately the development of that new policy. So as part of the review, we worked with Barry Bruce from the CSIRO to do some research, and the way that was done was looking at white shark residency. The question was, are sharks staying at this site longer because of white shark tourism? And this is what the CSIRO found. So the bar on the left there is the level of white shark residency at the shark cage diving site back in the early 2000s, and the bar on the right is what it had become by 2010. So it had increased from around 11 days up to 21 days. So what does that mean? There's clearly a trend there, but should we be concerned? So I've already talked about that one. The other thing that happened was that the arrival and departure patterns of those sharks changed over that period to more closely align with the arrival and departure of tour vessels. So both of these things are things that happened over that 10-year period with an increase in frequency. They only occurred at the primary shark cage diving site. They didn't occur at other sites around that area. So, you know, there could be a number of different explanations for that, but I think we should be concerned. I didn't have time to include the video on the actual shark tagging, but you can see here's a shark with a little tag on it. So it's basically the way this is done is a methodology that is now used quite broadly on sharks, but this was one of the sites where this was perfected, but basically using acoustic receivers that are moored out at the Neptune Islands and these little acoustic transmitters. So they basically record when a shark is in the vicinity of the receiver. So the residency is basically how long between the first and the last detection. So how long is that shark hanging around in the vicinity of the shark cage diving site? Okay, so where do we go? Where do we go with this? Clearly a healthy industry needs a healthy environment, and for this industry to continue to grow, it needs to have its act together. So acknowledging that we don't know all the answers, the need for us was to do something, and hopefully we would be able to establish a sustainable industry. So this is just a diagram of the normal distribution of shark residency. So obviously some sharks stay a long time, some sharks just pass through very briefly, but the mean residency in 2002 was in the middle there. So essentially what happened was we had a significant change in mean residency. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we would like all our sharks to be in that range, and what I'm starting to talk about now is the methodology that we developed with Brad Page and with the work of Justine Smith and others from the department. And it's looking at how do you actually take scientific findings and embed them into policy. So we have a target range, and the other option is we have a response range where green good, red bad, orange not so sure. So that's the basis of the policy, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that's played out now. So the two blue bars were the CSIRO research. The red bars are the monitoring work that we've done since the establishment of this monitoring program. So you can see the increase in residency pretty closely aligns with that increase in tour frequency. So is the policy working? Okay. The black dashed line there I've put in is the point at which we introduced a range of policy measures to safeguard against further increases in residency. So I don't have time to go into all of them, but there are limits on the number of operators, limits on the number of days of activity, limits on the amount of burley that can be used. There's training and accreditation for operators. There's a whole lot of other, I guess, softer things, like we now put more energy into liaison with operators so they understand licence conditions, all those sorts of things. So since the introduction of those policy measures, we have seen an improvement. So indicators are that those measures have addressed that increase in residency. It's only an indication. So how does this relate to our response range? So So the response range is a point where if residency hits that, it triggers a tightening of controls. So we haven't done that since we introduced the policy. So in 2010-11, we had a result there that triggered a response. Policy was put in place, and then since then, the first year was in our caution range, and the subsequent years have been in our target range. So by definition, that's saying that our monitoring results are telling us that we are getting a good result. So exactly what the policy says is that if residency hits the target range, we might relax licence conditions. So, for example, we may allow some additional days of operation, or we may allow additional licences. We've not done that because, of course, we don't want to go back into the red again straight away. We want to make sure it stays in the green now forever, or so we don't want to reverse the good work we've done. Conversely, if our residency hits back up into the response range, we've got it hardwired into our policy that we may tighten licence conditions. So we could allow less days of operation, less burley, etc. So it's not... So I guess the important thing here is that we've actually taken the monitoring program and actually hardwired it into the policy so that licence conditions are tied to the science. So basically, science and conservation often go together, and we're all used to seeing that, but the third element to this is that really nature-based tourism relies on good science as well. And through this sort of approach, we can ensure that things like this sort of enterprise are not only economically viable, but they're also ecologically sustainable, and the two things really go hand in hand. So this was as an example where really for a relatively small amount of money, this monitoring program costs us in the vicinity of $60,000 a year, and that's factored into licence fees, so it comes back into a contract that we run with Flinders University, and that's delivered through Charlie Hooverneers and was previously delivered through Paul Gray as well, so I'll just mention those two guys. But that science really has given government and the operators some certainty that we are on the right track, and those operators now have some confidence that they can continue to invest in their businesses. So I think I'll just stop on that, because really hopefully that makes the point that a growing and vibrant nature-based tourism sector really relies on good inputs of science for it to have that confidence that it is sustainable and it can be true ecotourism and not just bad tourism. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Nick.
Right.
How do I go?
Thanks, Barry.